Hello, this is a tutorial on Stylized Shading and Substance Painter. It's a process that me and my team use. Um, just a disclaimer that a lot of the filters and smart masks that I will be using in this tutorial are not available in some older versions of Substance Painter. The version I'm using is 11.03, just to note for you. This tutorial also it assumes that you have a low and high poly mesh readily available and done. Now I'm going to import my low poly model. I'm going to the baking tab, which is this croissant looking thing. I always start out with a 1K map. I'm increasing the dilation width, applying diffusion. This is where we put our high definition mesh, which appears here. Got like a happy looking face on it. Wherever there's red interlocking, that just means you need to up the frontal distance where the normals will bake on. I also increase the max rear distance a little bit. Also, if you're in the version of Substance Painter that I'm using, there's an automatic function now. It is experimental, where instead of distance based, it will automatically compute the best way to bake on the high poly mesh. I'm going to use it for this example. In the ambient occlusion tab, I like to lower it to 0.2 to 0.3. Curvature, I like bumping up the curvature. Thickness, I also like bumping up the secondary areas on the thickness as well. So I bake a 1K map. Realistically, for a game asset, you really only need a 1K map. But let's say you do want higher textures, you would bump that up from this menu right here. Now looking at my model, I just want to check to see that it's completely clean and that the high poly baked on well. It comes automatically with this paint layer. I'm just going to delete it because I want to make a fill layer. And this is where I will set the base color, the star that I want. I'm going to make it a nice eye-catching but not blinding yellow. And I'm going to then add a paint, and I only want the color channel. I'm going to paint on some colors. You do not have to be extremely accurate, and in fact, I recommend sort of being a little messy with laying down colors. I also want to add maybe some like little color splashes here and there. You can also change the alpha of your brush if you want. Add things like, or just have like a messier brush stroke. A nice interlay brush. And I'm using a mouse for this demonstration, but I highly recommend if you have a drawing tablet to use that, especially for later. And in this step, we're essentially laying down our base colors. This is if lighting, texture, everything is ignored. This is what the colors of the asset would be. Now, I'm decently happy with this. So, since this is a plushie, I want to add a height map for fabric. No, we don't want the color, we just want the height, and we don't really need metalness or roughness, but the default one looks shiny, so in our base color I'm going to roughness and make it rough because yarn is not shiny, at least normal cotton yarn is not shiny. And in our cotton texture, can change the tiling to match something that looks a bit more plush. And can also go under technical parameters. And if, because this is quite, the height is quite high, so to sort of dull it out a bit, because we are making a stylized asset and we just want sort of a peak of detail. We don't want it to be too detailed because then it looks more realistic and not stylized. Okay, so this is a good base. I'm going to make a folder, call it base. I'm going to put the materials in there. And now, in your assets tab, you want to go to filters. This is the filters tab right here. And there is stylization. You just want to click and drag and bring that into your layers. And right away, you can see it applies this painted, painterly sort of watercolor look. So in the material, or in the filter itself, there are presets. I like to switch between a few presets to give myself a good start. I usually bounce between painterly and painted and cell shading. In this case, I liked how hand painted looked the most. So we're going to go into the settings now. I'm going to increase the gradient. I'm going to increase backlighting. In the brush strokes tab, I'm going to increase the strokes amount. I'm going to change strokes select to strokes, because then we get to see the more stroke detail. I'm going to play around with the stroke scale. I'm going to play around with these two parameters till I find something I really enjoy. Can change the stroke size X and Y. Can change the random, sort of push and pull. And then I want to go under brushstrokes effect. I like to increase color variation. You can change roughness variation and metallic variation here, but in this case, it doesn't really matter because we want the entire brush to be rough. I'm gonna go into gradient now, and I want to give this plush sort of nice blue tint at the top. You can change the color blending mode here as well. And you can also add multiple colors if you'd like. In this case, I think there's a bit too much going on with our buddy here, so I'm going to turn it back to one color. Under the baked lighting tab, I'm going to change the color to be a slightly greenish hue. And there are various parameters you could play with here, but the one that I like to adjust the most is the light position. Because if you push and pull it correctly, you can get a nice underlight. And if you increase the diffuse intensity, it will show that gradient more. Diffuse radius intensifies it. I want to see how it looks from top view. I think I liked it on the bottom more. Turn down the radius a bit. Increase the contrast. And for me, I really like playing around with the baked lighting because it brings out brushstrokes a lot more, in my opinion. You can see wherever the light populates, gives it a nice looking highlight. I was just moving it around to show the light affects just how much detail you get in brushstrokes. I like to go back and forth between playing with parameters and the brushstrokes tab, because once I have some nice baked lighting, I can really make it look sort of watercolor and painted on. It's nice because this is all procedural, you're not actually going in and painting anything just yet. And even when you're in this step, you can go in and still change the base colors. Kind of want to make it a brighter yellow. That bright, because I don't like how washed out it's getting. different colors. We could do blue, make it nice water blue. And again, this is all procedural. Can toggle it on and off. Sometimes I like to take it a step further and add a baked lighting filter top of the stylized filter. And in the sun sky, intensity can change intensity a little bit. Then play around with the adjacent. Sometimes these don't even show up very well because of the competing. So the sun sky is the most dominant light in the baked lighting, and then think of your light 1 and light 2 as sort of a rim light, a nice rim light. So you can get these nice gradations of color if the original stylization didn't give you enough. And then what I like to do is I add a filter on top of the baked lighting, and I like to add a blur and make it either soft light or sometimes screen looks nice. In this case it doesn't because the colors are very vivid. I'm going to settle on soft light and reduce the opacity a bit so that the lighting blends into our stylized filter a bit. From here you can play around with it. Sometimes I like to move the stylized filter on top and you get an effect like this. And I use the baked lighting more as a gradient rather than purely for lighting purposes. And once I get something like this that I'm happy about, I have my stylization filter at my base and I'm happy with how this looks. You can also take it a step further by adding an actual paint layer. I'll just call it details. And you can go in with your brush, color pick different areas, and really flesh out shadows, hard edges, anywhere where you want to really control more of that, more of the brushstroke color. Again, the stylized filter, sometimes it can only go so far. And like, let's say you wanted these details to be more crisp. You wanted the eye paint to be more precise. That's when you would go in and on top, you can even paint like a little mouth. The stylization filter and the base colors are meant to serve as a quick base. so that you don't have to paint all of this by hand. But I do recommend taking a step further and pushing details up by manually painting on your asset. And again, once you're satisfied with these textures, the next step would be to export them. This is where you choose where the export goes, your file directory. Output template is where you want the texture files to unpack to. Unreal Engine packed. So if you're using Unreal Engine. Arnold AI Standard is if you're going to Maya, etc., etc. Output templates, you do have to specify the output template here and the output template here. Again, Unreal Engine, Arnold AI Standard. And then you would just hit export. And there you have it.